say, wait, yeah, who's okay? Good evening, everyone. Today we are learning Unit 2, that is Social Cognition Attribution Theory of Advanced Social Psychology. And before reaching attribution theory, there are certain concepts which needs to be clear before we reach attribution, the meaning of attribution. So let's begin the class. So what is social psychology? It is a branch of psychology which investigates how the behavior of individuals is affected by others and the social environment. And all of us form attitudes or ways of thinking about specific topics and people. We also form impressions about persons we meet, don't we? And assign causes to their behavior as well, especially after coming to the psychology. So whenever we see anybody behaving abnormally, so we give it a thought that there might be some cause due to which he or she is behaving the way he or she is behaving. Besides, our own behavior gets influenced by other individuals and groups. We do get influenced from each other, right? In some situations, people show pro-social behavior, that is, helping the needy and the distressed without expecting anything in return. Now, what is social behavior before coming to pro-social behavior? Social behavior is a necessary part of human life, and being social means much more than merely being in the company of others. That is social. You may recall from whatever you have studied in a previous classes that social psychology deals with all behavior that takes place in actual, imagined, or implied presence of others. For example, if you have to memorize a poem or recite it, you may have no problem in doing this when you're by yourself, right? But if you have to recite this poem to an audience, your performance might get influenced because you are now in a social situations. So there are certain situations which might occur. Let's see what. Even imagining that people are listening to your recitation, although they may not be physically present, may change your performance. For example, me, whenever I take a class, if I have to take a class, offline class, I'm very comfortable because I can see the students, you know, expressions, and based on that, it is very easy for me to move forward. But when I have to take a class in Zoom, because I cannot see anyone else, it becomes very difficult for me to take a class. So again, that is actually bringing a lot of influence in my performance as well. This is just one example that demonstrates how our social environment influences our thoughts, emotions, and behavior in complex ways. Social psychologists examine various forms of social behavior and try to explain their basis. Because of social influences, people form views or attitudes about people and about different issues in life that exist in the form of behavioral tendencies. When we meet people, we make inferences about their personal qualities, don't we? This is called impression formation. So, all these terms you people need to pay attention. Do not look at your books because it is all jumbled. We are also interested in why people behave in the ways they do. That is, we assign causes to the behavior shown in specific social situation. And this process is called attribution. I would repeat the meaning. We are also interested in why people behave, the reason why people is behaving the way they are behaving. That is nothing but attribution. The process is called attribution. Very often, impression formation and attributions are influenced by attitudes. These three processes, what three processes? That is impression formation, attributions, and attitudes. These three processes are examples of mental activities related to the gathering and interpretation of information about the social world, collectively called social cognition. Moreover, social cognition is activated by cognitive units called schemas. And cognitive processes cannot be directly seen. They have to be inferred on the basis of externally shown behavior. There are other examples of social influence that are in the form of observable behavior, which are easy to observe. Two such examples are social facilitation or inhibition, that is the improvement or decline in performance in the presence of others, and helping or pro-social behavior, that is responding to others who are in need or distress. Social psychologists have shown that one must go beyond common sense and folk wisdom in order to explain how people observe and make sense of their own and others' diverse behaviors. Through systematic and objective observations and by adopting scientific methods, it is possible to establish logical cause and effect relationship that explain social behavior. Any doubt so far? Or was I too fast or slow?
So far,
You
so
people
good.
all okay. Yeah. Let's move on to nature and components of attitude. A little more about attitude before moving on to attribution. For a few moments, just quietly do one mental exercise. Okay, today, how many times did you all, tell yourself, in my opinion, to anyone? Or others may say, what others may say. And so, okay, this is what I feel, but I feel like this.
Seven
So,
times.
didn't you? Yeah, right. Several times, right? You people try to give opinions, this is what I feel, that is what I feel, or what if others say like this, right? Don't we do that, right? So, whatever you fill in the blanks are called opinions. They are opinions. Now, continue the exercise. How important are these opinions to you? The topics of some of these opinions may be only moderately important to you. They are simply ways of thinking, and it does not matter much to you that others agree or disagree with your views. It doesn't matter, right? It is just your opinion. On the other hand, you may find that some other topics are extremely important to you. And if someone opposes or challenges your views about these topics, you get emotional, don't you? You may have made some of these views part of your behavior now. And in other words, if your views are not merely thoughts, but also have emotional and action components, then these views are more than opinions. They are examples of attitudes. When you take it too personally, when whatever people says about your viewpoints and you feel bad about it, you cannot take their opposing your views and you're feeling bad about it, which means now it is not just a view or an opinion, it is more than that. Now it is an example of attitude. Now that has become part of your attitude. All definitions of attitude agrees that an attitude is a state of the mind. It is a set of views or thoughts regarding some topic called the attitude object, which have an evaluative feature, that is it could be positive attitude, negative or neutral quality, like Praveen has most of the time neutral. It is accompanied by an emotional component and a tendency to act in a particular way with regard to the attitude object. The thought component is referred to as the cognitive attitude. The emotional component is known as the affective aspect, and the tendency to act is called the behavioral or cognitive aspect. Taken together, these three aspects have been referred to as the ABC components, that is, affective, behavioral, and cognitive aspects. Attitudes are themselves not behavior, they are not behavior, but they represent a tendency to behave or act in certain ways. They are part of your cognition along with an emotional component and cannot be observed from outside. It is within, it is dispositional. Attitudes have to be distinguished from two other closely related concepts, namely beliefs and values. Now, what is beliefs and values? Beliefs refers to the cognitive component of attitude and form the ground on which attitudes stand, such as belief in God or belief in democracy as a political ideology. And what is value? Values are attitudes or beliefs that contain a should or ought aspect, such as moral or ethical values. One example of a value is the idea that one should work hard, or that one should always be honest, that should work hard, should always be honest. So that is value, because honesty is the best policy. Values are formed when a particular belief or attitude becomes an inseparable part of person's outlook on life, and consequently values are difficult to change. So once your values are formed, they are strong, it becomes very difficult for you to change it. What is the purpose served by an attitude here? We find that attitudes provide a background that makes it easier for a person to decide how to act in new situations. For example, our attitude towards foreigners may indirectly provide a mental layout or blueprint for the way in which we should behave whenever we meet one. In addition to the affective, cognitive, and behavioral components, attitudes also have other properties. Four significant features of attitudes are valence, that is positivity or negativity. The second is extremeness. The third is simplicity or complexity. It is also known as multiplexity, and centrality is the fourth one. So let's look at the other features. First is valence. What is valence? The valence of an attitude tells us whether an attitude is positive or negative towards the attitude object. That is valence. The second is extremeness. What is extremeness? The extremeness of an attitude indicates how positive or negative an attitude is, meaning to what extent you're positive about something. Suppose I ask you to rate your pain between 1 to 5, or rate somebody's goodness between 1 to 5. So if you rate between 4, 1, or anything based on your opinion or whatever you feel, so that is extremeness. The extremeness of an attitude indicates how positive or negative an attitude is, to what extent. The third is simplicity or complexity. It is also known as multiplexity. And this feature refers to how many attitudes there are within a broader attitude, which means attitude within an attitude. For example, if you take a family, right? A joint family or any kind of family. Now, everybody has got attitudes, right? Attitude related to food, health, and all of that. So, attitudes within an attitude. So, this is multiplexity. The fourth is centrality. It refers to the role of a particular attitude in the attitude system. An attitude with greater centrality would influence the other attitudes in the system much more than non-central attitudes would. For example, in the attitude towards world peace, a negative attitude towards high military expenditure may be present as a core or central attitude that influences all other attitudes in the multiple attitude system. Now, how do you form attitude? Or how does one person forms attitude in general? That's what psychologists are interested, or we are interested, how are attitudes formed, right? Like many other thoughts and concepts that develop and become part of our cognitive system, attitude towards different topics, things, and people also are formed as we interact with others. We are not consciously forming it. As and when things come up in life, we form attitudes. However, there are specific conditions that leads to the formation of specific attitudes. Again, in which means attitudes are learned through one's own experiences and through interaction with others. So it is basically through your experiences and the way you interact with others. There are a few research studies that show some sort of inborn aspect of attitudes as well, but such genetic factors influence attitudes only indirectly along with your learning. Therefore, most social psychologists have focused on the conditions which lead to the learning of attitude. That is the reason that we are learning attitudes. Any doubts so far? Okay, now coming back to our unit, that is social cognition and attribution theory. So what is social cognition here? First of all, cognition refers to all those mental processes that deal with obtaining and processing of information, which we have learned in all our previous classes. Extending this idea to the social world, the term social cognition refers to all those psychological processes that deal with the gathering and processing of information related to social objects now. These include all the processes that help in understanding, explaining, and interpreting social behavior. The processing of information related to social objects, particularly individuals, groups, people, relationships, social issues, and the like, differs from the processing of information related to physical objects. Again, it is different. People as social objects may themselves change as the cognitive process takes place. For example, a teacher who observes a student in class may draw conclusions about her or him that are quite different from the conclusion drawn by the student's mother. Absolutely, that happens to every teacher who observed her or him at home. So a student sitting in the class, the teacher is observing the student differently. The mother has a different perception about his child. The student may show a difference in her or his behavior depending on who is watching him. The student is no less, he is a khiladi. The teacher or the mother. Social cognition is guided by mental units called schemas here. Right, that's what happens. So whenever we are in the class, when we are in the school, when the teacher is observing, again our behavior is completely different. But at our home, we act like animals, like maybe cats or dogs, if you have siblings. Yeah, so that is how it is. Yes. Moving on to schemas and stereotypes. Now, what is schema? All these are part of the unit. A schema is defined as a mental structure that provides a framework, a set of rules or guidelines for processing information about any object. I will repeat, it is defined as a mental structure that provides a framework, set of rules or guidelines for processing information about any object. Schemas are the basic units stored in our memory and function as shorthand ways of processing information, like a shortcut method whenever you need, thus reducing the time and mental effort required in cognition. In the case of social cognition, the basic units are social schemas. Some attitudes may also function like social schemas. We use many different schemas and come to know about them through analysis and examples. Most of the schemas are in the form of categories or classes. All these schemas are divided again, they're categorized. Schemas that function in the form of categories are called prototypes. So what is prototypes? Schemas that function in the form of categories are called prototypes, which are the entire set of features or qualities that help us to define an object completely. And in social cognition, category-based schema that are related to groups of people are called stereotypes. So something that is related to groups of people, that is called stereotypes. And these are category-based schemas. What? Prototypes and stereotypes. They are category-based schemas that are overgeneralized and are not directly verified and do not allow for exceptions. For example, suppose you have to define a group G. If you have never directly known or interacted with a member of this group, you will most likely to use your general knowledge about the typical member of group G. So one of the members, you will have some kind of perception. To that information, you will add your likes and dislikes. If you have heard more positive things about group G, then your social schema about the whole group will change and it will be more positive than negative. And on the other hand, if you have heard more negative things about group G, Your social schema will be in the form of a negative stereotype. The inferences you have drawn are not the result of your logical thinking, right? It's just that whatever you have heard or direct experience, you have not had any direct experience with the group, or it is not logical thinking, but are based on preconceived ideas. They are just your preconceived ideas about a particular group. The next time you actually meet a member of group G, your impression of this person and your behavior towards him or her will be influenced by your stereotype. It was mentioned earlier that stereotypes provide fertile ground for the growth of prejudices and biases against specific groups, and prejudices are negative. But prejudices can also develop without stereotypes. Next, moving on to person perception. What is person perception? It is an element of social psychology concerning how we process information about people. In other words, it refers to different mental processes that we use to form impressions of other people. And it includes conclusions based on your impressions about the people. The next topic is cognitive algebra. Cognitive algebra, under that there is something called additive and averaging models. What are these models here? Cognitive algebra proposes impression formation. It is a model of social psychology that proposes impression formation, which means the way in which we form impressions and attribute characteristics to people. It is processed through an assignment of values to traits. So assignment of values is based on the traits. And there are two main types of algebraic models that have been used in the study of information integration, and they are the additive model and the averaging model. What is additive model? In this approach, each trait receives a rating on the scale, and the resultant impression is simply the sum of these subjective trait values. That is, 2 plus 3 minus 1 is 4. That is new addition on old thoughts. The next is averaging model. Most important feature of this approach is that the inclusion of additional information does not necessarily make the impression more positive. It remains same. In contrast, a model employing addition would suggest that additional information would result in a more positive impression. And of these two models, averaging model has shown more accurate predictions, but again, applicability of such research in actual social situations is still questionable. Next topic, very important topic, moving on to impression formation. What is impression formation? Whenever we meet someone, do we not talk about first impression is the last impression, right? I think everybody has heard this. So whenever you're going to the interview, your family and friends will be like, okay, you have to form an impression, good impression. So yeah, every social interaction begins with the formation of an impression about the person or persons we meet in our day-to-day lives. Public figures and applicants appearing for job interviews are good examples that show it is very important to make a good impression on others. The process of coming to know a person can be broadly divided into two parts. One is impression formation, and second is your attribution. Very important. The person who forms the impression is called the perceiver. The person who forms the impression is called perceiver, and the individual about whom the impression is formed is called the target. The perceiver gathers information or responds to a given information about the qualities of the target, and it organizes this information and draws inferences about the target. So that's what happens, right? You just imagine yourself being interviewed. So you have a person who is interviewing you and you're the target. So the kind of information you are being formed there. And in attribution, the perceiver goes further and explains why the target behaved in a particular way. Attaching or assigning a cause to the target's behavior is the main idea in attribution. What did we learn attribution means? The cause of the behavior, why the person is behaving the way he or she is behaving. Often perceivers may form only an impression about the target, but if the situation requires it, they may also make attributions to the target. Impression formation and attribution are influenced by the nature of information available to the perceiver, social schemas in the perceiver, that is, including stereotypes about the target or anything else, personality characteristics of the perceiver, and situational factors. Situational factors is external factors. There are certain aspects, that are found in impression formation. Let us look at it one by one. The process of impression formation consists of the following three sub-processes. So there are basically three processes or sub-processes in impression formation. First is selection. So we take into account only some bits of information about the target person. So imagine yourself there as an interviewee and an interviewer, or you can be an interviewer. The second is organization. What happens next? The selected information is combined in a systematic way. Third, inference. We draw a conclusion about what kind of person the target is. Right? Have we not gone through this? Yes, we have been there. So there are three basic sub-processes, that is selection, organization, and inference. Some specific qualities influence impression formation more than the other traits do. The order or sequence in which information is presented affects the kind of impression formed. Mostly the information presented first has a stronger effect than the information presented at the end. This is called the primacy effect. That is, first impressions are the lasting impression, which is very commonly heard by all of us, I'm sure. However, if the perceiver may be asked to pay attention to all the information and not merely to the first information, whatever information comes at the end may have a stronger influence. This is known as recency effect. So there are two effects. First is primacy effect, that is first impression, last impression or lasting impression. The second is not the first impression again, it is the last one. So that is the most influential, most stronger influence. That is recency effect. And we have a tendency to think that a target person who has one set of positive qualities must also be having other specific positive qualities that are associated with the first set. This is known as the halo effect. For example, if we are told that a person is tidy and punctual, we are likely to think that this person must also be hardworking, right? These are our opinions about people. So if we just see somebody, okay, who is really well dressed, very tidy, and he arrives on time, then we might think, okay, this person is very hardworking, dedicated, but we might be wrong. So this is known as halo effect. Yes, moving on to situational or external and dispositional or internal causes of attribution. Are you all listening?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, so attribution. We already learned, right, what attribution is. Attributions are inferences that people make about the causes of events and behavior. Why something is caused, right? Psychologists use the concept of attribution to explain how people make sense of their own behavior and that of others. And people make attributions in order to understand their experiences. Basically, that's how it is. So now we are moving on to external and internal causes. I mean, what causes, the behavior? Whatever the person is behaving, why he or she is behaving? What are the causes? Is it internal, external, and what is internal? and what is external factors here. After forming an impression, we often go through the process of assigning causes to a person's behavior. This is also a systematic process as indicated by the researchers done on attribution. There are few aspects on attribution that have been found. See, when we assign a cause to a person's behavior, we can broadly classify the cause as being internal, that is, something within the person. If somebody is really troubled from inside, he or she is going to sound really rude, irritating, annoying most of the time because he's got internal issues. Or external, that is something outside the person, that is not within himself. For example, if we see a person A hitting another person B, as observer, we may explain the hitting behavior by saying that A hit B because A is a hot-tempered person, right? Don't we say that? Which is an internal, that is personality-related cause. Yes, like I told you. So somebody is very annoyed, irritated, is always angry, anxious. So all these are internal. There are certain factors that is causing that behavior. These are internal things. Or that A hit B because B behaved in a nasty way, or maybe B hit him first. That's why A is hitting him back. So these are external because he's not hitting, he did not initiate. It is the other person who initiated. Now it is his turn, of course. So he would do it. So this is situational cause, that is external behavior. So the other day, when during get together, so most of the people arrived late at the meet. So the external, there were a lot of external factors, like people gave example, like they gave certain reasons, like there was traffic jam, or they had to, you know uh, you know convince their wife, and that's why they got late. And there are other external factors, or sometimes weather conditions, right? We give such reasons as well, that heavy rainfall, that's why we reach late. So these are external behaviors, external factors. And when people make attributions for success and failure, the causes they give can be classified into internal or external factors, and also into stable or unstable factors as well. Bernard Wiener suggested a classification which is shown again, which Praveen will be presenting later. The stable factors refer to those causes that do not change with time. There are certain factors that do not change with time, while unstable factors are those that do change with time. In making attributions, there is an overall tendency for people to give greater weightage to internal or dispositional factors than to external or situational factors. This is called the fundamental attribution error. What is fundamental attribution error? I will repeat, it is very important. There is an overall tendency for people to give greater weightage to internal or dispositional factors than to external or situational factors, and this is called fundamental attribution error. And this tendency is stronger in some cultures than it is in others. For example, research shows that Indians tend to make more external, that is situational attribution than Americans do, right? Most of the time we give all such reasons on, traffic jam, right? Ma'am, it was raining. Ma'am, bus did not come. Ma'am, we were waiting for the cab person cancelled. So most of the Indians, this is what it says. There is a difference between the attribution made for success and the attribution made for failure. In general, people attribute success to internal factors such as their ability to hard work. So suppose somebody's got first rank. The other day, Prahash got 100 on 100 in 5 subjects. So he's going to say that, oh, it was my ability, it was my hard work. Oh my God, I, burnt candle through the night, and then I, wrote all the answers. So most of the time, whenever you are successful in life, you tend to give credit to your internal or dispositional factors, so, and not others, of course, such as ability or hard work. They attribute failure to external factors, such as bad luck, the difficulty of the task, and so on. Of course, first thing is, you in the school or in the college, you're going to blame the teachers only. Oh, teacher was bad, she did not teach well, she did not complete the portions. You always want to blame, right? Or sometimes, yeah, my company, my friends, they did not allow me to study. Yes, I think we can also do the same thing, that we have a group which doesn't allow us to study all the time. We are making fun in the class. And a distinction is also found between the attribution that a person makes for her or his own positive and negative experiences, that is actor role, and the attribution made for another person's positive and negative experiences, that is observer role. This is called the actor observer effect. For example, if you yourself get good marks in a test, you will attribute it to your own ability or hard work, that is actor role, internal attribution for a positive experience. So this was a positive experience, right? You got good marks. If you get bad marks, what will you do? You will say that this was because you were unlucky, or the other day maybe you didn't wear your lucky dress, so you were unlucky, or the cat crossed your path, or that the test was too difficult, or the paper was leaked maybe, so it was difficult. That is actor role. External attribution for a negative experience. So you have had a negative experience, now you are blaming the external situation. On the other hand, if one of your classmates get good marks in the test, what will you do? You will attribute her or his success to a good luck. Oh my God, maybe the paper was very easy. But in your case, what would you do? You'll be like, yes, yes, it was my hard work and determination, right? So don't we have that kind of attitude, right? So whenever your friend gets good marks, what will you do? You will say, oh, it was your good luck, or maybe the paper was very easy. So this is external attribution for a positive experience. So when it comes to you, you're giving all credit to your internal attribution, right? That it was your ability and hard work, right? But when it comes to somebody else, what do? You give credit to some good luck, that is external attribution, or the paper was easy, right? And if the same classmate gets bad marks, you're likely to say that his or her failure was because of low ability or lack of effort. Basically, whatever you say for you, for others, you're just going to say the opposite. The basic reason for the difference between the actor and observer role is that people want to have a nice image of themselves as compared to others. Any doubts so far? Are you all sleeping?
All good, Ritu. Continue.
No listening.
Okay. No listening?
She meant no, we're not sleeping, we are listening.
Okay. Yeah. Yes. So I think I am done. Next part will be taken by Praveen, or maybe I have a quick thing to do. Again, this is related for your coming classes and also will be helpful. Yes. Behavior in the presence of others. So how does one behave when the other person is present? See, one of the first observations made about social behavior was that performance on specific task is influenced by the mere presence of others. This is called social facilitation. For example, Ritu is about to participate in a music contest and she's very talented, yet she's feeling very nervous about the event. And if you were in Ritu's place, would you perform better in front of an audience or when you're alone? So, would you perform better in front of the audience or alone? As early as 1897, Norman Triplett observed that individuals show better performance in the presence of others than when they are performing the same task alone. For instance, cyclists racing with each other perform better than when they cycle alone. With time, more details came to the known to be known about this phenomenon. Let's see how. Better performance in the presence of others is because the person experiences arousal, which makes the person react in a more intense manner. This explanation was given by Zezong. This name is pronounced differently, anyways. So, this is called arousal, due to which people perform better. The arousal is because the person feels she or he is being evaluated. Cottrell called this idea evaluation apprehension. So you have that kind of, perception that you are under evaluation, you are being tested, so you tend to perform better. And the person will be praised if the performance is good. And he or she will also be certified or, will receive reward if the performance is good. Or also criticized if it is a bad, or will be punished. We wish to get praise and avoid criticism, all of us, right? Therefore we try to perform well and avoid mistakes, so we want to give our best. And the nature of the task to be performed also affects the performance in the presence of others. How? For example, in the case of simple or familiar tasks, the person is more sure of performing well, and the eagerness to get praise or reward is stronger. So the individual perform better in the presence of others than he or she is alone. But in the case of a complex or new task, what happens? The person may be afraid of making mistakes. The fear of criticism or punishment is stronger. So the individual perform worse in the presence of others than he or she does alone. If the others present are also performing the same task, this is called a situation of co-action. Like suppose in the group singing, so everybody singing the same song, no one is like 10 people are not singing 10 different songs, so that is nothing but co-action. In this situation there is social comparison and competition. Once again, when the task is simple or a familiar one, performance is better under co-action than when the person is alone. See, when you already know something, right? Whether you're alone or not, when you already know something, and if you have to repeat the task again in future, you would be more confident, right? Be it in a group or um alone. But if you're alone, you might not do, you might be lazy or something. But when you're in a group and you already know the topic or you already know the song, you're going to perform better. But if the song is difficult, say you don't know it, so what happens in group? You're not going to perform well because you don't know that. In short, task performance can be facilitated and improved or inhibited and worsened by the presence of others. So when everybody is watching you, you become conscious. And it might be bad also, it's not always good again. Many other kinds of social influence have been noticed. For example, if we are working together in a group, the larger the group, the less effort each member puts in. Absolutely, right? For example, while writing assignment questions in the first year, so the questions were there. So many people, they tried to search the answer and they put in the page numbers and everything. So the group was large enough, right? 200 plus people. So it became very easy for the group to complete the assignment. And this phenomenon is called social loafing, which is based on diffusion of responsibility. Any doubt so far? Any doubt? Are you all sleeping?
Only I am sleeping.
Okay, only you are awake. Okay, good. Should we continue today or tomorrow?
And have you reached more than 45%, 75%?
It's just half.
Then let's continue tomorrow, I think. How about
Okay, we
others?
can stop the recording then. What's it, Praveen? Would you finish in half an hour?